For 3 days, the elephant refused to leave his door. She stood there from sunrise to sunset, her massive body blocking the narrow path to Samuel Carter's small wooden house, her torn left ear shifting gently in the wind as villagers watched from a distance in fear. She didn't charge, she didn't make a sound. She just stood there, breathing slowly, heavily, as if waiting for him. Samuel was 74, long retired from the wildlife reserve, and he had never seen anything like it. Elephants don't seek out humans like this. They don't linger. They don't choose doorsteps. But this one had. And when Samuel finally stepped closer, he noticed something that made his heart drop. Her belly was swollen, her posture restless, her movements heavy. She wasn't lost. She was pregnant, and she hadn't come by accident. She had come back to the man who once saved her life. What happened the night the storm rolled in would leave an entire village speechless. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if something you once saved returned to you in its most vulnerable moment, would you open the door? Let me tell you what really happened. Samuel Carter had never meant to grow old alone. But the forest has a way of shaping a man's life until solitude feels less like absence and more like alignment. At 74, his days followed a quiet rhythm that rarely changed, waking before dawn to the soft grey light that spilled over the reserve boundary, boiling water on the small iron stove in his kitchen, and sitting on the narrow porch of the wooden house he had built with his own hands more than 30 years ago. His home stood at the very edge of the wildlife reserve, where the last line of human settlement dissolved into tall grass and scattered acacia trees, and beyond that, miles of protected wilderness stretched in restless, breathing silence. Most men his age had moved into town long ago, trading dust and open skies for paved roads and television noise, but Samuel had chosen to remain exactly where he had spent his life working. The land was familiar to him in a way that no crowded street ever could be. He knew where elephants preferred to cross during dry months, which watering holes shrank first in summer, and which patches of tall grass concealed old rusted snares left behind by careless hands years ago. Even in retirement, he walked the outer boundary once a week, not because anyone asked him to, but because he felt responsible in a way that paperwork could never fully erase. There had been a time when his name carried weight among the rangers stationed in the reserve. Younger recruits used to follow him through tall grass, trying to mimic the way he read tracks pressed into dust, or the way he could tell, simply from the angle of broken branches, how long ago a herd had passed through. Samuel had never considered himself extraordinary. He had simply believed in consistency: protect the corridor, remove the trap, move the injured animal before panic turned into conflict. He had seen enough chaos in his early years to understand that most harm came not from nature itself, but from the space where fear met ignorance. Poachers setting cable snares in migration paths, farmers panicking at the sight of a wandering bull elephant, tourists pushing too close for a photograph. The work had never been glamorous. It was long hours beneath punishing sun, boots worn thin by uneven terrain, nights listening for distant gunshots that signaled trouble. Yet Samuel had stayed, season after season, watching calves grow into full-grown giants and predators carve out territories that shifted subtly with rainfall and prey patterns. One particular monsoon season, more than a decade earlier, had nearly cost him something he could not replace. Heavy rains had turned the riverbank mud into a swallowing trap, thick and deceptive beneath shallow water. A call had come in from villagers who spotted a young elephant struggling near the bend of the river, separated from its herd and sinking deeper with every frantic movement. Samuel had arrived with a small team, rope coiled over his shoulder, heart steady despite the chaos unfolding before him. The calf's mother circled at a distance, trumpeting in distress but unable to approach without endangering both herself and the trapped young one. Samuel had waded into mud that climbed to his thighs, anchoring rope to a nearby tree while instructing others to maintain distance. The calf's left ear had torn slightly against a submerged branch as it thrashed, the ragged edge flapping helplessly as it tried to free itself. It took nearly 2 exhausting hours of coordinated pulling before the mud released its grip. When the calf stumbled toward its herd, drenched and trembling, the ground seemed to vibrate with relief. Samuel had watched the matriarch pause, facing him for a long moment before guiding her young back into the trees. He had never spoken about that moment in emotional terms. To him, it was simply another rescue logged and filed away in memory. Years passed. The torn-eared calf became one of many elephants he observed from a respectful distance, part of a herd that migrated predictably along the northern corridor he had fought to protect from agricultural expansion. Samuel never tried to approach her again. He believed firmly that wild animals should remain wild, unburdened by human expectation. When he finally retired from active duty, it was not because he wanted to, but because his knees began to protest long patrols, and the department insisted younger rangers take over field operations. Even then, he refused to move away. His house remained at the reserve's edge, close enough that at night he could hear distant elephant rumbles carried faintly through cool air. Those sounds never frightened him. They reassured him that the balance still held. In recent years, life had grown quieter. His wife had passed long ago, and his son lived hours away in a city that felt foreign to Samuel's bones. The village children still waved when they passed his porch, and occasionally a ranger would stop by for tea, but most days belonged to the wind and the birds and the slow settling of afternoon heat. He tended a small vegetable patch behind his house and kept a weathered pair of binoculars near the window, out of habit more than necessity. Sometimes, as he sat watching the horizon blur into gold at sunset, he wondered whether the animals remembered anything about the hands that once freed them. Not in a sentimental way. He knew better than to assign human thoughts to creatures guided by instinct, but in the subtle ways patterns persist. The herd still used the corridor he secured. The riverbank, where the calf had nearly drowned, remained undisturbed by new fencing. In that sense, memory lived not in minds, but in movement. The morning the heavy footsteps approached his yard began like any other. Samuel was pouring hot water into a chipped mug when the faint vibration traveled through the wooden floorboards beneath his feet. At first, he assumed it was distant thunder rolling across the reserve, but the sky outside was clear, pale blue, stretching unbroken above the tall grass. Then the vibration came again, closer this time, deliberate. The glass in his window rattled softly against its frame. Samuel set the mug down slowly. He had heard that sound before, and it was not thunder. Samuel did not rush to the door. Men who spend decades around large animals learn that sudden movement belongs to fear, and fear belongs to chaos. Instead, he stood still for a moment in the center of his kitchen, listening to the slow, measured tremor that passed through the wooden boards beneath his boots. It came again, not frantic, not destructive, just heavy, deliberate. He walked toward the front door with the same steady pace he had used when approaching wounded wildlife years ago, resting one hand lightly on the frame before pulling it open. The elephant was already there. She stood so close to the porch that Samuel could see the fine network of creases around her eyes, the faint dust clinging to her wrinkled skin, the slow, controlled rise and fall of her ribcage. Morning light spilled across her broad forehead and down the curve of her trunk, casting long shadows across the yard. For a split second, instinct pressed against Samuel's ribs, not fear, but the ancient awareness that he stood inches away from something powerful enough to crush wood and bone without effort. But she did not advance. She did not trumpet. She simply stood. Villagers had already begun gathering at a cautious distance along the road that ran past his property. Word traveled quickly in small communities, and the sight of a full-grown elephant blocking an old ranger's front door was not something anyone ignored. A few men held sticks uselessly at their sides. Children were pulled behind fences. Someone shouted Samuel's name from afar, warning him not to step closer. He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on her left ear. There it was, the tear, not large, but unmistakable. The ragged edge that had once been smooth before it caught against submerged wood in a riverbank swamp. Time had healed it imperfectly, leaving a small split that fluttered slightly in the breeze. "You," he murmured under his breath. The elephant's trunk lifted slowly, curling just slightly in his direction. Not high, not aggressively, just enough to taste the air between them. It had been more than 10 years. Calves grow quickly. Herds migrate, seasons pass, yet standing before him now was no confused wanderer. She was fully grown, taller than the porch roof, shoulders broad and strong, tusks modest, but emerging confidently. And beneath the dust and muscle and steady presence, there was something else, her belly. Samuel's gaze lowered instinctively. The curve was unmistakable, heavy and rounded, hanging lower than normal for a non-pregnant cow elephant. Her stance confirmed it. Weight shifted slowly from one front leg to the other, breathing deep, measured, restless but contained. "She's pregnant," he said aloud, more to himself than anyone else. The murmurs from the road grew louder. "Drive her away," someone called. "She'll bring the herd," another shouted. Fear moved faster than reason, and Samuel understood that. A pregnant elephant is protective, unpredictable, dangerous if startled. But nothing about her posture suggested aggression. There were no flattened ears, no raised trunk in warning, no stamping of the ground. She just stood there. And when Samuel took one cautious step forward onto the porch, she did not retreat. Instead, she shifted slightly, not to block him, not to threaten, but as though adjusting to keep him within her line of sight. "You came back," he said softly. The words felt strange in his mouth, almost foolish. He knew better than to believe animals returned out of gratitude. Yet the timing, the place, the torn ear, it was too precise to dismiss entirely. Another tremor of movement rippled through her body. She turned slightly to the side, giving him a clearer view of her abdomen. It wasn't subtle anymore. She was heavy with life, and there was something in her restlessness that went beyond simple migration. She paced once across the narrow space in front of his house, circling awkwardly due to the fence line and the small vegetable patch. Her steps were slow but deliberate, as though testing the ground. Then she stopped again, positioning herself exactly where she had been before, facing the door. Samuel's chest tightened. Elephants are known to return to water sources during drought. They remember migration routes for decades. They recognize specific trees and paths across vast terrain. Memory, in their world, is not sentimental. It is survival. Places associated with safety are not easily forgotten. And this yard, this patch of earth beside the reserve boundary, this was where he had once treated her torn ear after the mud rescue, flushing debris gently while her anxious mother hovered at a distance. He had done it quickly, efficiently, but he remembered the way the calf had stilled beneath his touch. Not tame, not trusting, but not panicked either. Could that memory persist? A low rumble vibrated faintly from her chest, barely audible, but deep enough to be felt through the porch boards. It wasn't a warning, it sounded more like strain. Samuel's gaze sharpened. "She's not just visiting," he muttered. Clouds were gathering at the horizon now, thin at first, but darkening subtly along the edges. The air felt heavier than it had an hour earlier, humidity pressing close against skin. Storm season was unpredictable, and heavy rain could turn open ground into unstable terrain within hours. She paced again, this time slower, her breathing deepened. Samuel had seen this before, not in elephants specifically, but in countless births across species during his years in the field. Restlessness, circling, the search for ground that feels secure. "She's looking for a place," he said, From the road, someone shouted again for him to get inside, but Samuel remained where he was, studying her posture, the subtle tension along her flanks. This wasn't random. She had crossed miles of reserve land to stand here, not at the river, not in open grassland, not with her herd, here, at his door. And as a distant roll of thunder finally murmured across the sky, Samuel Carter realized, with a quiet, steady certainty, that the elephant had not returned for shelter alone. She had returned to give birth, and she had chosen his yard. The first crack of thunder did not startle her, but it startled the village. A sharp, rolling sound moved across the sky, distant yet heavy with promise, and several of the men who had gathered along the road stepped backward instinctively, glancing at the darkening clouds that now pressed low over the reserve. Samuel remained on the porch, one hand resting lightly against the railing, eyes fixed on the elephant's shifting stance. Rain-season storms could turn quickly, one moment still and humid, the next tearing across open ground with sheets of water and violent wind. If she was truly about to give birth, she would not want open savanna. She would want ground she recognized, a place that felt, in whatever way elephants define such things, safe. She moved again, but this time not in a wide circle. Instead, she lowered her head slightly and began nudging the soil with the edge of her trunk, testing it. The earth in Samuel's yard was firmer than the riverbank, compacted over years of human footsteps and seasonal drying. The small vegetable patch lay off to one side, protected by a short wooden barrier. Beyond that, the boundary fence marked the beginning of reserve land. She turned her body slowly, angling herself away from the road and toward the back corner of the yard, where a large acacia tree offered partial shelter. Samuel stepped down from the porch. Gasps rose from the road behind him, but he ignored them. He did not approach her directly. Instead, he walked in a wide arc toward the tree, keeping distance but positioning himself where he could see her clearly. "No one comes closer," he called back to the villagers, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his chest. "Give her space." She paused, watching him as he moved. Her eyes were calm but alert, dark and reflective beneath thick lashes. There was no flaring of ears, no aggressive posture, only awareness. Another rumble vibrated low from her body, deeper this time. Not thunder, internal, a contraction. Samuel felt the recognition settle into him fully now. He had witnessed births before during patrols, antelope, buffalo, even once from a safe distance a lioness hidden in tall grass. The signs were unmistakable: restlessness, subtle tightening along the abdomen, the deliberate search for position. Rain began in soft drops, tapping lightly against the tin roof of his house before falling more steadily across open ground. The villagers retreated further beneath nearby awnings, though no one left entirely. Fear had shifted into something else. Wary curiosity, disbelief, a sense that they were standing on the edge of something unusual. She positioned herself beneath the acacia tree. The branches above did not offer full cover, but they broke the worst of the falling rain. She turned in a slow circle once more, then stopped, head lowered. Her breathing grew heavier, flanks rising and falling with measured intensity. Samuel could see tension ripple through her muscles beneath the skin. "She remembers," he murmured. He did not mean it in a human way. He meant that this place, this patch of ground, had once been associated with survival, pain and rescue, mud and release, safety after struggle. Elephants carry maps in their minds more complex than most people realize. They remember waterholes decades after droughts erase them. They remember migration corridors long after fences try to interrupt them. Why not this yard? A stronger contraction seized her. She shifted her weight abruptly, lifting one hind leg slightly before setting it back down. Her trunk reached toward the ground again, sweeping slowly across the soil as if clearing debris. Samuel's heart pounded harder now, not from fear, though the danger was real, but from the gravity of what was unfolding. If she panicked, if the villagers rushed in, if thunder startled her at the wrong moment, the consequences could be catastrophic. A frightened mother elephant could level a small house in seconds. "Everyone back," he called again, firmer this time. "Further." The rain intensified, streaking diagonally across the yard. Thunder rolled closer, lightning flickered faintly behind thick clouds, yet she did not flee toward open land. She remained beneath the tree, body angled slightly toward the house, as if keeping it within her sight. Another contraction, stronger. Her muscles tightened visibly. She let out a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through the wet earth and into Samuel's boots. It was not a call for her herd. No answering rumble came from the reserve. It was internal, instinctive. She was alone. That realization struck Samuel with sudden clarity. Where was the herd? Elephant cows rarely give birth completely isolated unless circumstances demand it. Had she separated intentionally, or had she come here ahead of them? Wind whipped across the yard, bending tall grass flat in one direction. The tin roof rattled sharply. A loose shutter slapped against the side of the house. Samuel fought the urge to move closer. He knew better. Interference could shatter the fragile calm that held her steady. She adjusted again, hind legs widening slightly, time stretched thin. The rain now fell in heavy sheets, turning the dirt yard slick, but not yet muddy enough to trap her. Samuel's vegetable patch was already flattening beneath the downpour. He barely noticed. Her tail lifted slightly. Samuel swallowed. It was happening. A deep, strained sound escaped her throat. Not loud, not violent, but unmistakably effort. She leaned forward slightly, bracing herself against the ground. The villagers watched in complete silence now. Even the children sensed the shift from spectacle to something sacred. Another contraction. Longer. And then Samuel saw it, just barely at first. A dark shape emerging beneath her tail, glistening against rain-soaked earth. His breath caught in his throat. "She chose here," he whispered. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the yard in white for a split second before plunging it back into storm shadow. And beneath the acacia tree, in the middle of a rain-lashed village yard, the elephant began to give birth. The storm came down harder, as if the sky itself had decided to test her resolve. Rain no longer fell in drops, but in heavy sheets that blurred the edge of the reserve into a shifting grey wall. Thunder cracked directly overhead now, loud enough to shake Samuel's windows, lightning cutting sharp white veins through the darkened sky. Yet beneath the acacia tree, the elephant did not retreat. She stood braced against the downpour, legs spread slightly, massive frame steady, despite the force of wind pressing against her side. Her breathing was no longer slow and controlled. It came in deep, rhythmic surges, each contraction visible along the powerful curve of her abdomen. The dark shape emerging beneath her tail grew clearer through the rain, glistening and fragile against the wet earth. Samuel remained exactly where he was, several yards away, rain soaking through his shirt, boots sinking slightly into softening ground. Every instinct told him to move closer, to help, to shield, but experience held him back. A laboring elephant does not need interference. She needs space, quiet and ground that does not threaten to collapse beneath her. The villagers had retreated even farther now, standing beneath overhangs and trees along the road, silent witnesses to something few humans ever see this closely. Fear had given way to awe. Another contraction seized her. She leaned forward heavily, trunk reaching toward the ground as though anchoring herself. A low, resonant rumble vibrated from deep within her chest, carried strangely clear even through the roar of rain. It was not a call to the herd. It was something older, instinct meeting effort. Her hind legs trembled slightly, muscles straining beneath rain-darkened skin. Then it happened. With a final, powerful surge, the calf slipped free. For a fraction of a second, the newborn hung suspended before gravity claimed it, falling gently onto the softened earth beneath her. The sound it made was small, almost lost beneath thunder, a wet thud against mud, and then stillness. The world seemed to pause around that tiny shape lying at her feet. Samuel's heart stopped in his chest. The calf did not move immediately. It lay on its side, slick and folded awkwardly, its small trunk twitching faintly. Rain washed across its body, clearing away birth fluids, revealing dark grey skin that seemed impossibly delicate compared to the towering mother above it. The elephant turned quickly, despite her exhaustion, lowering her trunk to the newborn. She touched it gently at first, then more insistently, nudging its side, sweeping mud away from its face. Her movements were precise and careful, nothing like the immense strength she carried in other moments. She shifted position to block the wind from hitting the calf directly, her body forming a living wall against the storm. "Come on," Samuel whispered without realizing he had spoken. The calf's trunk lifted weakly, then dropped. One small leg twitched. The mother rumbled again, a deep sound that vibrated through rain and soil alike. She nudged the calf's side, urging it upward, and then, faint but unmistakable, a small cry broke through the storm. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was a thin, trembling sound, the first breath of something that had never known air before. Samuel felt something tighten painfully in his chest. He had witnessed life begin in many forms, but never like this. Not under thunder, not in his own yard, not from an elephant he once pulled from mud with rope and steady hands. The calf struggled, front legs pushing weakly against slick earth. It slipped once, falling back down. The mother did not panic. She simply waited, trunk hovering protectively. Another nudge, another attempt. The calf managed to lift its head briefly before collapsing again. Rain continued to pour, but the worst of the wind shifted slightly, passing through as quickly as it had risen. Lightning moved farther across the sky. Thunder rolled more distantly now. The calf tried again. This time, its front legs found firmer purchase. Its back legs wobbled beneath it, thin and uncertain, shaking visibly under weight they had never supported before. For a moment, it stood halfway upright before tilting sideways, nearly falling. The mother adjusted instantly, placing her trunk against its flank to steady it without force. "Easy," Samuel murmured, though the word belonged more to himself than to them. On the third attempt, the calf rose fully, unsteady, trembling, legs splayed slightly apart, but upright. The mother let out a long, low rumble that seemed to carry relief within it. She brushed her trunk gently across the calf's back, clearing away remaining mud and rainwater. The calf leaned instinctively toward her massive body, seeking warmth and shelter. The villagers watched in complete silence now. No one spoke, no one dared interrupt the moment with unnecessary sound. The storm began to weaken further, rain softening from sheets to steady drops. The sky remained dark, but the violence had passed. Beneath the acacia tree, mother and newborn stood together, the enormous and the fragile side by side. Samuel realized then what she had done. She had crossed miles of reserve land while heavily pregnant. She had separated from the safety of her herd. She had chosen this yard, this precise patch of ground, to bring new life into the world. Not random, not desperate. Chosen. The calf nudged clumsily against her belly, searching instinctively. She shifted slightly to allow it closer. The world around them, fences, houses, villages, seemed irrelevant now. Samuel stood soaked and silent, understanding something he would never fully explain to anyone else. She had not come because she was lost. She had come because once, long ago, this was where she survived. And now, in her most vulnerable moment, she had returned to the one place her memory marked as safe. By the time the storm fully passed, the sky had shifted from violent grey to a softer washed-out blue, streaked with pale light that hinted at sunrise pushing through thinning clouds. Rain still clung to the leaves of the acacia tree, falling in slow droplets that tapped gently against the ground, but the fury had gone. Steam began to rise faintly from the soaked earth as the first warmth of morning reached the yard. Samuel had not moved all night. He stood near the edge of his porch, rain-drenched clothes now drying stiff against his skin, eyes fixed on the mother and calf beneath the tree. He had expected that once the birth was over, once the storm quieted, she would turn instinctively toward the reserve and guide her newborn back into open land. That is what wild animals do. They move, they rejoin their kind, they do not linger where humans live. But she did not leave. Instead, she remained exactly where she had given birth, standing protectively over the calf as it made clumsy, determined attempts to nurse. The newborn's legs trembled visibly each time it adjusted its footing, thin joints bending awkwardly before straightening again. Its trunk swung without control, brushing against its mother's belly, against its own face, against the damp earth, learning its own weight and balance in real time. Each time it stumbled, the mother's trunk steadied it with effortless precision, never forceful, never impatient. The villagers had returned cautiously as daylight strengthened, gathering again along the road. Their fear had softened into something closer to reverence. No one shouted now. No one demanded that Samuel drive the elephant away. They simply watched. "She's still there," someone whispered. Samuel nodded faintly. He stepped slowly off the porch, not approaching directly, but walking along the edge of the yard to assess the ground. The storm had softened the soil, but not turned it into deep mud. The acacia tree had broken much of the wind. It was as if the yard itself had cooperated in the timing, firm enough to hold them, sheltered enough to protect. The elephant's head turned slightly toward Samuel as he moved. Her eyes found him immediately. There was no tension in her posture now, no guarded stiffness, only awareness. She did not step away from her calf, but she did not block him either. The space between them felt balanced, not dominance, not submission, but coexistence. "You're not done yet," Samuel murmured quietly. The calf finally found its position beneath her, nursing instinctively. The sound was small but steady, soft suction, accompanied by the low rumble of the mother's breathing. The sight of it struck Samuel more deeply than the storm had. He had seen calves in open grassland before, surrounded by protective herds, but never this close, never in the quiet intimacy of his own yard. Time passed differently that morning. The sun climbed higher, drying the ground inch by inch. Birds returned to the branches overhead, cautiously at first, then normally, chirping as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. The village resumed its usual sounds in the distance. A motorbike starting, a gate creaking open, a dog barking. Yet the center of Samuel's yard remained suspended in something gentler. Hours passed. Still, she did not leave. Samuel began to understand that departure would not be immediate. A newborn elephant cannot travel far in its first hours. Its legs are too uncertain, its strength still forming. The herd, if nearby, would not push her. They would wait. Elephants are patient in ways humans rarely are. He wondered where they were now, just beyond the boundary perhaps, watching from cover. He imagined older cows standing alert among the trees, aware of the birth but respecting her choice of distance. Elephants communicate across miles through low-frequency rumbles humans barely perceive. It was possible they knew exactly where she was. By late morning, the calf attempted to walk farther from the tree. It wobbled forward 3 steps before losing balance and tipping sideways into the damp grass. The mother moved instantly, trunk looping gently around its midsection, lifting just enough to guide it upright again. The calf let out a soft, confused squeak before leaning back into her leg. Samuel found himself smiling without realizing it. "She remembers," he whispered again, though this time the words carried less question and more quiet acceptance. He remembered the mud rescue vividly now, the way the calf had leaned against his knee in exhaustion after being pulled free, the way he had rinsed debris from the torn ear, while her mother stood close enough to make his pulse hammer in his throat. He had never expected to see that calf again. Rangers rarely track individuals across years unless research demands it. Yet here she was, no longer small, no longer helpless, standing in his yard as a mother herself. And she had not chosen open savanna, she had chosen this place. By early afternoon, the calf stood more steadily. Its legs still shook slightly, but strength was building. The mother began to shift her weight differently now, less braced, more forward-oriented. She turned slowly toward the reserve, testing direction. The villagers stiffened. "Is she leaving?" someone asked. Samuel didn't answer immediately. He watched her carefully. The calf took 2 hesitant steps beside her, nearly bumping into her flank before adjusting its course. She paused, waiting for it to stabilize. Then she moved again, one slow, deliberate step toward the fence line. But after 3 steps, she stopped. She turned her head back toward the house, toward Samuel. For several long seconds she simply stood there, rain-damp skin catching the afternoon light, calf pressed awkwardly against her side. Her gaze held steady, unblinking. Samuel did not move. He did not step closer. He simply stood in the open yard, boots planted in soil that had become part of a memory larger than himself. Then she did something that silenced even the quiet murmurs from the road. She lifted her trunk slowly into the air, not high in alarm, not wide in warning, but upward, steady, holding it there for a brief, suspended moment, and then she lowered it again. The gesture was subtle, easy to dismiss, but to Samuel it felt like acknowledgement, not ownership, not gratitude in a human sense, recognition. She turned once more toward the reserve, guiding the calf carefully beside her. This time she did not pause. Step by step, slow and measured, she moved toward the boundary fence, where a ranger corridor gate remained open. The calf followed, stumbling slightly, but improving with each stride. The villagers parted instinctively as she passed near the road, none daring to stand in her path. At the edge of the reserve, she stopped one final time. The calf leaned against her leg, steady now, small but determined. She did not look back again. Together, mother and newborn disappeared into the tall grass, swallowed by green and distance as though the yard had only borrowed them for a night. Silence settled over the village. Samuel remained where he stood long after they vanished. His vegetable patch lay flattened. The yard was churned with massive footprints. Mud streaked the side of his house. But he did not see damage. He saw proof. Proof that the wild does not forget safety. Proof that sometimes, in its most vulnerable moment, it returns to where survival once began. And as the wind shifted gently across the reserve, carrying faint, distant rumbles too low for most to hear, Samuel Carter understood something simple and profound. She had not come because she was lost. She had come because she remembered. For a long time after the elephant and her newborn disappeared into the tall grass, Samuel Carter did not move. The wind shifted softly across the reserve, bending the tops of the acacia trees in gentle waves, and the world resumed its ordinary rhythm as if nothing extraordinary had unfolded in the small yard beside his house. The villagers lingered at the roadside for several minutes, speaking in hushed voices, pointing toward the corridor gate where mother and calf had vanished, trying to anchor what they had witnessed in words that felt too small. Eventually, one by one, they returned to their homes. Children were called inside, doors closed. The motorbike that had gone silent during the birth sputtered back to life and rattled away. But Samuel remained. He stepped slowly toward the acacia tree where the ground still held the shape of the calf's first fragile imprint. Rainwater pooled faintly in the deeper impressions left by the mother's feet. The earth carried the memory of weight, massive, undeniable weight. And yet what lingered most was not power, but tenderness. He crouched down carefully, resting one weathered hand against the damp soil. It was still warm, the warmth of life recently pressed against it. He thought about the riverbank years ago, about the mud swallowing a small body and the frantic sound of a mother's calls echoing across water. He remembered the strain in his shoulders as he pulled rope, the quiet relief when the calf stumbled free, the moment he rinsed debris from that torn ear while thunder rolled in the distance. Back then, he had never imagined that memory might travel forward through time in ways unseen. He had done his job, nothing more. Protect, remove harm, step back. Yet here she had been, heavy with new life, restless, searching, choosing. Samuel rose slowly, brushing mud from his palms. He walked back toward the porch, pausing once to glance toward the tall grass at the edge of the reserve. It was still now, no movement visible, no shadow betraying their path. But somewhere beyond that curtain of green, a newborn calf was learning how to walk beside its mother. Somewhere in the distance, perhaps just out of sight, the rest of the herd had gathered around them, low rumbles passing between generations, sound waves carrying information too deep for human ears to fully understand. That evening, as the sun lowered itself toward the horizon, the reserve glowed in gold and amber tones. Samuel sat in his old wooden chair on the porch, a chipped mug of tea cooling slowly in his hands. The yard bore the marks of what had happened, flattened vegetables, churned earth, broken fence slats, but he did not see loss. He saw passage. Word of the birth traveled quickly through the region in the days that followed. Rangers came to inspect the ground, to confirm what Samuel had already known. They listened carefully as he described the torn ear, the timing of contractions, the way she had positioned herself beneath the tree. They nodded, taking notes, trying to understand why an elephant would separate from her herd to give birth so close to human settlement. One younger ranger asked quietly, "Do you think she remembered you?" Samuel had smiled faintly at that. "I think she remembered this place," he replied. That's enough. He did not romanticize it. He did not claim a bond beyond what was visible. Elephants do not return out of affection in the way humans define it, but they remember safety. They remember survival. They remember ground that did not betray them. And perhaps, just perhaps, they remember the absence of harm. Weeks passed. The yard slowly healed. New vegetables were planted. The soil settled. Rain washed away the deeper tracks, though faint impressions remained longer than expected, as if the earth itself was reluctant to forget. Occasionally at night, Samuel thought he heard distant rumbles drifting across the reserve. Low, layered sounds carried by wind. He would sit on the porch and listen, not searching for meaning, simply acknowledging presence. One early morning, nearly a month after the birth, he stepped outside with his binoculars and scanned the far edge of the corridor. There, in the pale light, he saw movement, a small herd grazing calmly beyond the boundary. Among them was a young calf, still slightly awkward in its stride, pressing close to a cow with a torn left ear. The calf stumbled once, then corrected itself, nudging against her leg. Samuel lowered the binoculars slowly. He did not wave. He did not step forward. He simply stood and watched as the herd shifted direction, melting back into tall grass like mist dissolving under sunlight. The yard was quiet again. The acacia tree rustled softly overhead. The house creaked faintly as wood adjusted to warmth. Life had returned to normal. And yet something had changed, not in the forest, not in the herd, but in the understanding carried quietly within an old man who had spent his life standing between two worlds. He had always believed that protection mattered even when unseen, that small acts, repeated consistently, shaped the future in ways too subtle to measure. He had never expected confirmation. He had never required gratitude. But on a storm-soaked night beneath a trembling sky, a mother elephant had chosen his yard over miles of wilderness. Not because she was tame, not because she was lost, but because somewhere deep in instinct and memory, that patch of ground carried the imprint of survival. And as Samuel Carter closed his door that evening and listened to the quiet breathing of the reserve beyond his walls, he understood something simple and steady. Sometimes the wild does not come back to say thank you. It comes back because it remembers where it was safe.